Welcome to Macon Memories. I'm Lynda Wright at Randolph-Macon College. Today is April 28th, 2014, and today I'm speaking with professors in the Computer Science Department at the college, Professors Ben Burrell, Chuck Leska, and John Rabung. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, and then I'll let each of them talk about how they came to the college. But for introduction, we'll go around and they'll each say their name.
I'm John Rabung.
I'm Ben Burrell.
And I'm Chuck Leska.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll start with you, John. Can you tell us how and when you came to teach at Randolph-Macon College?
Well, I came twice. Once in 1972, when I was just getting out of the Army, looking for a job, and it turned out that jobs, PhD in computer science or a PhD in mathematics and sciences was a pretty common degree back then because of the Sputnik scare. So there was a big crunch on jobs for PhDs in the sciences. My PhD is in mathematics, and I applied to, must have been 150 different schools and got 150 short replies. But I was stationed in the Army at Fort Lee. And so I thought, finally, I think I'm just going to look at local schools and find out if they possibly have any kind of an opening. And I called Randolph-Macon, and Ronald Moore told me, and Ronald Moore, who was chair of the math department in 1972, told me that they had an opening, but he was about to fill it on Monday and this was a Friday that I called. And so I said, can I come in and talk to you this afternoon? And I did, and long story short, he hired me. So I was hired. They only had, they had the allocation for an instructor in mathematics, not an assistant professor. And so I took an instructor's pay in 1972. 72, probably other folks have told you, Lynda, that in 72, that era, the college was in some pretty dire straits. And I had wanted to get a job where research was more a premium than it was at Randolph-Macon at the time. Combination of two things. I stayed at Randolph-Macon for 2 years and then went to Virginia Commonwealth University in their mathematical sciences department, where I began teaching math and statistics and computer science, and more computer science because there weren't people with degrees in computer science. There weren't even departments in computer science, a lot of them at least. At that time there were some, but not a lot. And so as I was teaching computer science, I was trying to bootstrap myself. I had a minor in computer science in my graduate program. But I was trying to bootstrap myself into teaching more computer science, and was thinking about taking leave to go to some place like Stanford or Cornell or something like that to just take a year and learn some more computer science. But it turned out that at the same time there was a computer literacy grant given to Randolph-Macon. This was around the early 80s. 1981, 82. And the grant was for computer literacy at Randolph-Macon college-wide. At VCU, I went to a workshop at Salisbury College and Pascal, which was an up-and-coming programming language to teach at the time. And there at the workshop at Salisbury College, I met at least 5 or 6 faculty members from Randolph-Macon, including people from computer science, psychology, philosophy, physics, and maybe even the dean of the college was there. The dean at the time was Elton Hendricks, who was a physicist. And so I knew that there was something going on at Randolph-Macon, and then it turned out that Elton was taking a course at VCU in computer programming. And so we commuted back and forth a few times. He lived in Ashland. I still lived in Ashland. And he convinced me that I ought to take my leave at Randolph-Macon rather than at Stanford or Cornell. And he also said that while I was at Randolph-Macon, he would consider me a faculty member here, not a visiting faculty member, and the tenure process would start even though I might consider myself on leave from VCU. So at the end of the year at Randolph-Macon, I did come to Randolph-Macon. At the end of that year, I stayed at Randolph-Macon. And in computer science this time. I was in the math department the first time. And at that time, well, the rest of it is history of the department. That's how I got to Randolph-Macon. So
That's fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah.
How about you, Ben?
Well, my story I think is a little shorter. I was teaching at Richard Bland College in Petersburg, which was part of William and Mary at the time. It was between 76 and 86. And while I was there, I was kind of starting a little bit of the computing program there. And my degree also was in math from Ohio State. While I was there, I started a grad program at VCU in a master's program in computer science. In fact, I think one of the first classes I took, I think it was 1978, John was actually sitting in on a class. It was a friend of ours who was teaching it, Dick Allen, who lived up here north of Ashland and has since passed. But so that's when I think I first met him. So I applied for a position. I had an open position at Randolph-Macon in '86, and applied, came up, and interviewed. I drove up. It's probably the cheapest interview they've ever done. He took me to lunch at the snack bar for $1.30 sandwich, I think. So it's for a sandwich and gas.
Who did you interview with?
Oh golly, I'm sure it was the president. The dean at the time was Jerry Garris. Department members. John, I think, was the only full-time at that time when I came, and there were maybe a couple of a part-time person maybe was also here. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yep.
And other faculty in the building. So I was fortunate, thanks to John, to get the position, and started in 1986 and moved up from down Colonial Heights up to Mechanicsville.
Good. Very good. How about you, Chuck?
Well, I'm the newbie on the block. I came in 2001. I came from Ithaca College. Needless to say, it's cold up there. My youngest son, Sean, had just graduated from Ithaca College, and I knew I could move. And I started looking at smaller liberal arts colleges in the South. I applied to like 3 or 4 places. I'd met John before, but I didn't remember at least that he was at Randolph-Macon when I made the application. I came. I interviewed with Ben and John. Let's see, Deanna was on the committee, and so was David Bratt. I got to talk with the president and with the provost at the time. It was President Martin. And the provost was Rob Holyer. And I got to interview with Tom Koppler and then a bunch of students. But they're the only ones I remember actually talking to during the interview process.
So the department was obviously growing. If you were, when Ben came, you were the only full-time person.
No, I wasn't. Mary Teresa Roberson was here at the time. She had a master's degree in computer science from UVA, and was an alumna of Randolph-Macon. Later went to Philip Morris Research. So she was here, and we had a fellow who did a lot of part-time service who was working at VEPCO, Larry Stafford. He did some very good work for the department.
But it was obviously growing. You were adding numbers, it sounded like, by the time Chuck was coming.
Yeah, I think when Ben came, we finally had 3 full-time members. And then,
well, I want to talk about how the department has grown and changed since you've been here. But before we do that, can you look back the other direction just a bit and talk about what the computer science department was like? If you have any secondhand anecdotes about what it was like before you came, or who you came under, who you came under, and how it developed, how it came to be, and then we can move forward in time.
I could tell a little bit about that. I know that Dick Grove, who was in the physics department, started Randolph-Macon's computing. At the time, I believe they had a computer in the basement of Mary Branch dorm. Do you know about that? Have other people talked about that?
No, but I know that was where all the administration was.
You need to talk with Mary Maxwell.
Oh, I did, yes. And she was a
Okay.
key punch operator. Yes.
Yeah, something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Certainly I wasn't here at that time. So Dick Grove started the whole thing, and he started a computer science department. And I'm not sure what year that was. You could probably resurrect it from faculty minutes if you wanted to. But it was in the mid-'60s sometime, which is very early for a small college, a liberal arts college, to be generating a computer science department. The computer science major didn't come into effect until '81, but there was a department. When I arrived as in the math department, Dick Grove by that time had left. I think he went to Virginia Commonwealth University as the director of their computing center, and then later to
Mississippi State.
someplace.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so when I arrived in the math department in '72, Harris Burns, who was a chemist, he had a PhD in chemistry, was the only person in the computer science department. He taught courses and was director of the computer center. So he did both things. Then I left for VCU. By the time I came back, I think in the interim, a fellow named Harry Gardner, who I really never knew, I think I probably met him once or twice, but I really didn't know him, was the computer center director. And by that time, Mary Teresa Roberson had come on as a computer science faculty member. And when I arrived, the computer was an IBM 1800 mini computer that you communicated with by teletype. And so we taught our courses there. I'm sorry. That was when I was here in the math department, 72 to 74, IBM 1800. When I came in '82 to return in the computer science department, there was a Perkin-Elmer 3200 machine, and they had terminals for that, cathode ray tube terminals for that. And so that's about all I know about before I came or in the meantime.
Good. Well, let's talk a little bit. Thank you for bringing us up to date on that. But let's start from there and for your tenure and talk about how the department has changed and what you taught when you first came as opposed to what you're teaching now. And we can just open it up to all of you.
I think what we've tried to do since I've come here was to follow curriculum guidelines established by some professional organizations in our discipline, the Association for Computing Machinery and the IEEE Computer Society had guidelines about every 10 years that came out, I think 1978, 91, 2001, and 2011. But then there was also a group, I forget the name of it, some liberal arts consortium that came up with guidelines about 5 years later after each of these other new guidelines came out that had guidelines for liberal arts colleges. So, 86 and 2007 and maybe before that 96 maybe, I guess, too. So we've always tried to follow those guidelines. And so, generally when I started, I think we had sort of an intro sequence, like most schools, a core sequence of courses and then some electives that students took. And that's kind of remains sort of constant. It's just what's is in the core that's changed and what there's been electives that have changed, but the intro has been, kind of the same kind of course, but it's the languages has changed and the paradigms that we use, language paradigms have changed over the years. So a lot has remained the same, but I think a lot of the fundamentals have remained the same. We emphasis on programming, design, learning good techniques for debugging and documenting programs, learning about algorithms and how to analyze them. Some sort of mixture of theory and within those courses of computer science theory and also mathematics. And then also I think the ultimate goal has always been, and then as time went on, we even had the more active learning sort of environments with laboratories and things like that. But the ultimate goal, I think, for our students has always been to eventually be able to learn on their own. And I think that's, if you look at alumni later on and you talk to them, I think that's one of the things I think they always kind of recognize when they tell us about their time here, that they learn to learn on their own.
Mm-hmm. Which is so important for a field that changes so rapidly. If you only, taught them what they learned in that, or they only knew what they learned in that class, as soon as they got their first job, that would be obsolete probably. So
Right.
you need to know how to continue learning.
Certainly true of the languages. As the languages sort of come and go, I think I've taught Computer Science 1, the first programming course in Fortran, C, C++, Pascal, PL1, Java, Python, so all different kinds of languages.
Mm-hmm.
The languages come and go, and for good reasons. Many of the principles of programming are still underneath all of those. So we had some conceptual notions that I think would last even though the language went out of vogue. One of the things that I remember from my time here in terms of cultural change is that when I arrived, shortly after I arrived, because of this computer literacy grant that Randolph-Macon had, which, by the way, allowed us to buy our Kpro machines. Yes, has anyone talked about those? The faculty each of us was granted half the cost of a Kpro 2 machine, and the cost was $1,400 for the whole cost. And so each of us got Kpro 2 at half price. Anybody on the Randolph-Macon's faculty got this, and this was I think prior to the Apple Macintosh coming out. So there was Apple IIe's around and so forth, but not the Macintosh. So lots of people on campus had these Kpro devices, which are supposed to be portable. They weighed 40 pounds, and the keyboard sort of snapped onto the front of the monitor, and you really lug this heavy thing around with you. It was really, you look it up on the web sometime, the Kpro 2. So that was part of the computer literacy effort, and also we wanted to do something to instill computer literacy in students. So there were big issues about how do you do that. And we eventually came up with 2 one-hour courses that were required of every student at Randolph-Macon. One was just was computers in society kind of thing. So this was a discussion kind of thing about computers. And the other was a 1-hour hands-on, here's how you do a word processor, and here's how you do a spreadsheet, and that's press this button and watch what happens kind of stuff. So that sort of shows you where we were at the time, and certainly today when students come in, they don't need anything like that because they've done it all their lives pretty much. But our effort was computer literacy, and that no longer is needed.
Yeah. When I came in '86, you got to remember that PCs were probably only out about 6-7 years. I think the Apples came out around 78. Radio Shack's about 80, and then the IBM PC came out about 80. So, I mean, when I came, we didn't have any email, we didn't have internet, anything like that. I don't think that came to maybe, later, early 90s maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so quite different from what it is today.
Well, in the computer literacy component, was there part of the grant to focus on faculty or staff?
Yes,
use of
yes,
PCs?
campus-wide, yeah.
Yeah, and how was that received across, campus?
Very well. That's what I was
Oh, the Kpro.
sort of referring to when I talked about going to Salisbury, and I found all kinds of Randolph-Macon faculty there.
Mm-hmm.
There were lots of people involved, and in fact, the computer literacy course on computers in society was headed up pretty much by Mike Wessels in psychology, and he wrote a textbook for that course.
Wow.
And I think later on, maybe Dan McCaffrey became director of that portion of computer literacy.
That really was across the board then.
Oh, yeah.
All departments. Good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in psychology. I know a fellow who was in the philosophy department here who later went into a computer science graduate program and left Randolph-Macon.
Huh.
Can't remember the name, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
And by the way, John also wrote a book for that course too. He didn't want to mention it, but he wrote a nice he wrote a nice programming book using the spreadsheet as a programming environment that we use. That was a very nice book.
Thank you. Yeah, all of you feel free to blow your own horn in here, or or each other's. So thank you for that. Well, I think you may have already touched on this, but the anything else you want to say about the computer resources? You talked about the mainframe, and then the move to.
Yeah, what I remember, we had, I guess, PCs when we did the computer literacy course in Copley 201, the big lab, I think.
That came as a result of an NSF grant.
Right, okay.
I think it was it amounted to $120,000 to get PCs into that room 201 that you now know as the computer lab, but it was actually built in 1968 as Study Carrol's room, and there were study carrels in there, as well as in room 200, which is now the Mac lab next to it. So those things became computer labs over the time that we started getting PCs into the school.
Yeah, I was going to say also, later on the computer science machines that we used were mainly over where the ITS does training now in that room, and we bought we were pretty well supported for Sun workstations, which are Linux-based machines, and we use those in our upper level courses and core courses. And eventually, I don't know, maybe 10 years later or so, we finally went to a pretty much completely PC environment, even for Linux and Windows machines. Yeah, up to today now, where I guess our fanciest machines are like what we call dual quad-core machines, where they have several processors in them, but certainly less costly to operate, I think, our department than it did, back in the 90s. Machines were so much more expensive back in the 90s, so. Like a Sun workstation would run $10,000, whereas you can get a nice dual quad-core machine, which is more powerful today, for maybe $3,000. So, so.
Well, you may have already said this, and I didn't understand it, but it sounded like when you first came that the computer science department and the computing center were run by the same folks. And then eventually, obviously, the computing needs of the college took off and grew, and then the academic department grew. So can you talk a little bit about that, or how that split off? Or
Before I came over here, I was trying to think of the computer center directors that I've known, and starting with Dick Grove was probably the first one, then Harris Burns after that. When I left, Harris Burns was in charge. As I mentioned, while I was at VCU, I think Harry Gardner was in charge there. Mm-hmm. And then Boyd Moore became the computer center director, followed by Steve Salzberg, and then Bill Morling, and after Morling, Tom Koppler, who really organized it. Tom Koppler was great at getting the computer center really on the ball. And not to denigrate the others, I think just that Tom was super organizational skills. Mm-hmm. And now, of course, Kirk Baumbach is there. Mm-hmm. Of those, I'm sure that Dick Grove, Harris Burns taught courses as well. Boyd Moore occasionally taught a course. Mm-hmm. But after that, I think there was nobody teaching courses and directing the computer center. So when the computer science major came into effect in 81, Mary Teresa Roberson was the one full-time faculty member. In 82, then I came and we had 2 full-time faculty members.
So as a department, that's probably the split where the department grew as with a major in academic department, and then the
Yeah.
computer center would have
Right.
other needs. Yeah.
Right.
And administrative needs.
Yeah, our department's a little bit different than most small college departments. A lot of times computer science will come up as part of the math department. And you'll have people teaching math who then will start teaching computer science. In fact, back in the 80s, there was a big move to take a lot of math people and retrain them as computer scientists by going to summer programs that gave you a master's degree. So that's how a lot of the computer science departments really got started back in that time period. Yeah.
And both of you had math backgrounds, but was your background math
Yeah,
as well?
I have a PhD in math.
All of you have math backgrounds, yeah. So that's natural, yeah. Well, thank you. That sounds like we've kind of got up to speed on that sort of. Chuck, any courses particularly that you taught? If you want to talk about academics at all and the changes you've seen since you've been here?
Well, being a short timer,
Things have changed quickly, though.
yes, but as Ben pointed out, curriculum recommendations change about every 10 years. And I've only been here 13. So this is only the second change in major curriculum that has come up. And we have only just begun addressing that change in the curriculum. A lot of talk, no action yet. I think if I was going to add anything to what Ben said about our curriculum, it certainly was based on the liberal arts model, which is a considerably compact model because liberal arts schools offer a large number of general education courses and require them. I think that what really changed in the courses, at least in some of the courses, were that although the fundamentals remained the same, as computers developed and as software for the computer developed, that had impact in what some of the content of the courses became. For example, I taught operating systems a number of times when I first came here, and if you just take a look at the fundamental principles of operating systems, fundamentally the same until we got into the multi-core machines. But if you take a look at what operating systems we were working under and how they changed and how that impacted what you would talk about in the courses, there were considerable changes in a lot of courses. And I would say the only other thing I would add to what Ben had said is that where you saw the reflection of the changes in what people perceive as the discipline of computer science were in the elective areas. And things that used to be interesting became less interesting, maybe even moved into the fundamental area, and then new courses developed and became part of the elective program at most of schools like ours.
Right. Can you give an example of something like that?
Well, one that
went from elective to becoming part of the fundamentals, or the other way around?
Sure, I suppose if I'm pressed, I'll be able to do that.
I just didn't know. No, I didn't know if there was a certain elective course that you all particularly enjoyed teaching that then you couldn't teach any longer because things had moved, or if you had any particular favorite. That was all.
Oh.
No pets in that area.
No, well, no. I'm trying to think of things that were taught back when I was a young professor that no longer...
One of the things Chuck did for us was bring a software engineering component into it, about how you write software. We were looking for, at that time, a person who was either good database or software engineering or networking, because we didn't offer those important topics. And he brought software engineering to our department, yeah. I don't know if it was his favorite, but...
Good, thanks. Anything else on curriculum changes or anything like that?
Maybe a little something on clientele. Computer science over the years has been a rather unique discipline, I think, in terms of its popularity. it comes and goes. It's popular in waves, and then we're struggling to find students, and then it becomes popular again. And included in that wave-like enrollment nature is that women were at first very much involved as students of computer science. When we were in the mid-'80s, if you look back at, for example, the Richard E. Grove Award plaque that we hang in our hallway and look at the early years, you'll see that women were dominating that award. Somehow then, and I don't know whether, well, some of it is larger culture. That is to say that our dips in enrollment were consistent with dips in enrollment nationwide. And it's hard to say what causes this. But certainly after the mid-'80s, when we had a dip then, and then the web came on, the popularity rose again, but women didn't come back. And since then we've been struggling to, as a discipline, not just at Randolph-Macon, but as a discipline, to attract women into computing. It's a very attractive career kind of choice. Certainly good pay, and when unemployment went way bad in the recession, it didn't happen in computing. But still, somehow there's a phenomenon. I don't know what it is, but recently we had a dip in computing, and I think it was because of the news stories about outsourcing. And everybody thought the computing jobs are all going to India and China and so forth, and suddenly we didn't have any students. So I think our discipline is pretty sensitive to cultural perceptions.
Interesting.
Yeah, we normally would probably graduate 6 to 8 majors a year, and maybe that got down to 2 or 3 in some of those lean years. But sometimes we've had 9 or 10, but we're probably maintaining around a 6 or 7 majors a year. So we do a lot of non-major courses as well. Sometimes at the request of other departments. Like probably our most popular course is a business apps course, right? And at the request of Econ Business, I think it accounts on accounting degree as well, that course. But we've done others over the years. When I first came here, I think Charlotte Fitzgerald, who was the sociology department at the time, asked me to teach a basic programming course with some statistical package, SPS, I believe was the package, for their students. And then, over time we offered things that we thought would be popular. I know Chuck taught a robot programming course.
Yeah.
And more recently, we added a mobile apps course, things that we thought would be interesting to students. And I think the curriculum started to change as the internet became popular. More web kind of programming courses where you're writing, client-side things where you're doing web pages, and then server-side programming where you have a database on that and giving back information. So we've added courses in those 2 areas as well. So we kind of responded to what other departments have asked, and also to the nature of to what was popular.
Have you seen an increase in enrollment or majors since, with the web and so many apps and that sort of mobile applications of computers? Have you seen that becoming more popular now? Is it on the rise?
Yeah, it's hard to separate the causes, but we are seeing better enrollment now. But in part, what we might call the new curriculum, but it actually came into effect in 2005,
Right.
allowed Computer Science 111 as a natural science and lab kind of thing on the general education requirements. That has attracted a lot of students to our department, and a number of them decide to stay. They really like what they're seeing there. They wouldn't have otherwise gone into computer science, perhaps. So it's a change in curriculum, plus the change that you mentioned in general society, where they're really interested in apps and the web and whatever else. We're seeing a lot of interest now among our majors. They'd like to see courses in cybersecurity for obvious reasons. I mean, that's big in the news.
Well, talking about courses with business applications, do you want to talk about your work with the business department, sort of interdisciplinary work? Or
Well, this may be a little embarrassing. Well, I could take the high road first. Let's take the high road first. I've taught a couple of first-year colloquium with Ed Showalter. I assume that's what you really wanted me to talk about. And we did a course in security. Ed did the social science part, and I did the computer science part. And then we followed that. No, actually, we preceded that with a course in communication. Ed did business communication, and I did how the varying forms of ways you can communicate using a computer and the risks that are associated with communicating in those fashions. And beyond that, I did this past J-term, I did a travel course with both Ed Showalter and George Lowry, where I taught our computer applications and business course, and the students that I had were signed up for one of the other two courses, Ed's business course or George's economics course, and they had projects where they used the Excel spreadsheet as part of the projects, and my students served as consultants while we were over in England on those projects.
good.
Now, I've also done research with Ed and George. My big research project with Ed was, Ed at the time was using, well, a number of business people were using Monopoly as a game that taught business principles. And Ed's challenge to me was to figure out how they could start the game in the middle so that they didn't have to sit so long playing the game to get to the
good part.
basic principles.
Yeah.
So he gave me a series of ideas of things to try out, and over the course of 3 or 4 years, I wrote a simulation of the Monopoly game that tried out all these different combinations of things, and we learned that A, there was no way to shorten the game, B, that people got tired of hearing us at conferences talking about Monopoly, and C, that there is actually an advantage to going first under certain conditions in Monopoly. In fact, the computer, under my direction, played many, many millions of games, and virtually 90% of the time, either the first player or the second player would win the game, which we found interesting, but it wasn't a big seller on the open market.
Okay, thanks. Well, speaking of travel courses and just experiential learning, maybe we could talk about your service trip to Haiti and any other interdisciplinary or travel, just unusual teaching experiences you've had.
Yeah, I can talk about the Haiti course. My church, Redeemer in Mechanicsville, had been part of the Catholic Diocese of Richmond twinning program in Haiti since about 1997. And we were twinned with a women's organization in Las Cahoebas, which is in the center part of the country, but over towards the DR a little bit. And so in 2007, Chuck and I started thinking about taking students down to do some sort of service learning course where they would teach, perhaps, and then also experience some cultural immersion activities. And then through past visits, I was familiar with Maison Fortuné Orphanage, which is in Inch in the center part of the country. And they had an elementary school with about 120 students. boys and girls, as well as a computer lab with some older desktop machines and actually an internet connection too that works sometime. So we thought we would do some computer-related active learning exercises with these students, and eventually decided, though, to use Computer Science Unplugged, which is actually where you don't use computers, but you teach computer concepts, okay, without computers. A lot of these things are sort of kinesthetic learning activities where they're running through networks and other things. We actually met that summer before in 2007 with Tim Bell, who is the founder of Computer Science Unplugged. He's from New Zealand. And Lynn Lambert, who's a faculty member at Christopher Newport, who's a advocate of these activities. We met him in Williamsburg for lunch, I think it was.
Yep.
And so we thought, okay, this looks good. Let's do it. So we had got 4 students to sign up. The limit was 6 because we had to take these this little airplane from Port-au-Prince to Inch, where you'd land on a soccer field kind of thing, or with animals on it and so on. So they had to circle it once to clear the animals off. But they could only seat, I think, 3 or 4 people in each of those planes. We had to take it twice, actually. And it used to be like a 3-hour drive, but a 20-minute flight. So that was the way to go. So we had 4 students sign up: Ambrose Phillips, Hassan Shonakin, James Richardson, and Alexandra Sweeney. And we needed a translator, and Aisha Hilliard recommended Camille Grevet, who was a graduate student from France but was visiting in the Modern Languages Department. And we told Cami that we would gladly pay her way if she would please come and translate into French, because in Haiti the students know French and also Haitian Creole. And while we were in Port-au-Prince, I just happened to meet a student there, computer science student, Daniel Prevost, who was actually from the Inch area, and he said he'd go along too to translate into Creole. So our students would teach the course, the material. Then Cami would translate it into French, and then Daniel would translate into Creole. So, and Chuck and I were basically like coaches. We didn't do any teaching. We would, I did some video, and Chuck, and of course at night we would talk about, how it went that day and prepare for the next day. And we'd actually prepared the week before we left, first week of January. We went through and made props, and students went up and practiced, what they were going to do and so on. And then we were in Haiti for a couple of weeks. Port-au-Prince in the beginning for some cultural immersion, teaching a week at the orphanage, and then we would go to went to Jacmel as sort of a R&R at the end, which was on the southern coast, kind of an artsy kind of town. And the students taught things like binary numbers, how a computer represents numbers and words and pictures and so on. And we did some sorting algorithms, some data compression, where you want to go take the data and make it shorter so that when you translate it across the internet, it doesn't take as long. Showed them some basics of that. Error correction: if you transmit something and it makes an error, how can correct that error? And the need for precision when you're writing a program. We would have a student stand at the front of the room with a picture and describe it. He'd be writing the program basically, and the students at their seats would then have to draw that picture. They'd be the computers interpreting that program. And then also we did a little exercise with tennis balls, which showed the need for cooperation where you're sharing resources. We actually made a video, about a half-hour video on it. And if you Google computer science Haiti, it'll come up as one of the YouTube videos, or it used to anyway. Okay. So that was 2008. In 2009, we went again. We took Andrea Gonzalez, a physics major actually, signed up, and only one student, and we taught a language called Scratch, where we actually use computers. And it's a graphical programming environment that was developed at MIT, where the students then would write programs by dragging in little puzzle pieces, and snapping them together to form the program. And then when you ran it, it would interpret those puzzle pieces, what they were saying. And the basic goal that week was to, it's a good environment for sort of like staging a play, writing a story. Mm-hmm. So the idea was for students by the end of the week to write a 2 or 3 scene play where a couple of these figures would interact with each other, you know. And in 2010, we had 2 students signed up who later canceled. That was the year of the earthquake, January 12th, 2010. But Chuck and I still plan to go down.
This is a J-term course.
This is a J-term course.
The earthquake was in January.
January, yeah.
Just days before you were to leave?
Yep.
Actually, Chuck and I were going to leave on Thursday. That happened on a Tuesday. But if we had taken students, we usually left on that Tuesday. And actually, the earthquake was a little before 5 o'clock, and our plane usually gets in at 4:30. So it could have been that we'd have been there if students had actually signed up for the course. But so Chuck and I still plan to go and teach. We're also going to do some teaching of the teachers, right? We normally taught 4th, 5th, 6th graders and then high school students after they returned in the afternoon from high school. So we taught about 4 hours a day when we... With
the 2 translators set up the same way with the French?
We didn't have Cami. Cami only came the first year when we did the unplugged activities. But Daniel did come with us the second year, and probably would have come with us the next year too when the earthquake happened. But of course, all the flights were canceled, and so we couldn't go down. We had planned to go, I think, in 12 and 13, but we had the cholera outbreak in Haiti, and then we had some personal medical issues, so we couldn't go either of those years. So the last time we went was 2009. But service learning has taken off now. You know, there's a big thing here. It's getting support, and I'm really happy to see that. And I think our students have really got a lot out of it.
Anything?
Well, I have to say, I don't know if it's part of the video or not, but my favorite parts happened during the first year. First, it was when we were doing the cooperative game where they were passing the balls.
Right.
The youngest group, the 4th graders, were they the youngest group that year?
Yeah.
They whomped every other group. They
Wow.
they were sitting around at night practicing.
Good.
And the other fun thing was when we drew the network on the basketball court.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Trying to get them to follow the topology was worth the price of admission.
Yeah.
It was like the old cops routines.
Yeah, it was, and then the other thing was fun. It became a competition. We were timing. Chuck was timing how fast the kids could get through the network, and it became us against the students. So one of the teacher was picking all his fastest and quickest students, to see if they could beat our time. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
That's good, and I bet the double translation was a challenge, or probably if you could have heard it on the other end. That's the thing, is you didn't know what they were saying, but you wonder how what was lost in, twice translated.
Yeah, it really worked out well, I thought, for them to hear it twice. And the kids understood what was going on, because when we would do it, our students would lead an activity, we'd have them go up, and they knew exactly what we were talking about. So a lot of bright kids.
Well, it's a great experience for the children in Haiti, but for our students too. They say on those service learning trips, I'm sure our students benefit equally, if not more, than the people in the places they're serving.
Right.
Any other special? Well, let's talk about your involvement at the college. I know, John, you've been very involved as a leader in the first year experience program. Would you like to talk about your?
Well, before that, it was the Curriculum Review Committee.
Okay, let's talk about
chaired that, and that was a 5-year effort from 1999 until 2004 or 2005. We had 6 people on our Curriculum Review Committee. It was Chaz Gowan, myself, and Greg Doherty were the men on the committee, and the women were Kristen Claren, Awisha Hilliard, and who else was on the committee?
Was Beth Gill? She was kind of involved at that time.
Beth Gill. Thank you very much. And it was a really hard-working group. We had faculty workshops and faculty fora and uncountably many faculty luncheons and people working on models of computing and so of curriculum and so forth. And finally, when we thought that we had discerned a bit of what the faculty wanted to do, which was our intention really, we put together a curriculum and eventually got it past the faculty. And that's no easy matter to get the faculty to approve a new curriculum. And finally they did, although there were still naysayers about it, especially about the first year experience for one reason or another. Once we got the curriculum, it received good support. We got grant money from the Mellon Foundation, from the Arthur Vining Davis Foundation, from the one in Florida. Up to it was about $800,000. It was the DuPont, Jesse Ball DuPont Foundation also. Up to $800,000 to implement this thing. And so we were able to give stipends for people to develop first year experiences and so forth. The first year experience that we implemented has now been voted out of the faculty the curriculum. We've now got a replacement for that. But while it was there, I think it was interesting and unique for Randolph-Macon. We on the curriculum review committee tried to make that a good academically rigorous first year experience, as opposed to some other schools that had first year experiences which were pretty much, here's how to get around on campus and our libraries and so forth. We intended ours to be an interdisciplinary, full year, first year colloquium. Personally, I did one with Beth Fisher early on in one of the pilots, 2004-05, where she did classical society and culture, and I did mathematics in those cultures. It was a lot of fun. In fact, she later wrote up a paper, and I now have an article. The article has my name on it with in the Classics Journal.
Yeah. That's
So I was
great.
pretty impressed with that.
Yeah.
Later, I did 2 or 3 versions of a first year colloquium with Jim Foster, where he was doing biological development from egg to a cellular being of some sort, a cellular development. And our students in computer science were using a little programming system called NetLogo to simulate that sort of thing. And we felt, Jim and I did, that it was a very successful collaboration. And I just really loved collaborating with both Beth and Jim to learn about what they did and what they thought about and what the research was, and to try to do some reading into the other discipline to figure out how I can connect what I know with what they know and so forth. Very productive. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a very worthwhile portion of the curriculum. I hope that we can replace it with something that's just as worthwhile. I don't think that our model is any longer feasible because Randolph-Macon's enrollment is growing so much, and yet the faculty size is not growing at the same rate. So we can't have the nice small colloquia that we had at the time. So I think it has seen its time, and it was good, and enjoyed having it there. And I think a number of faculty members did a lot of really good things with it, some service learning courses, as well as other neat interdisciplinary connections, collaborations, whether it was service to the town of Ashland or service to Hanover retarded citizens or whatever. There was that, and a lot of good speakers came to campus because of the money that went with the program. It was nice.
Well, thank you for your work in that for many years. Anybody? No? Well, you've talked about yours, Chuck, your classes that you taught the first year. Thank you. Any other service to the college, committees, or that kind of thing that you'd like to talk about?
I'll say that after we adopted the new curriculum, I think Chuck chaired the curriculum committee at that time, and he ushered through a lot of neat stuff on how are we going to assess this curriculum and so forth. So maybe if he wants to take off on that.
Wow, down the primrose path. Well, I'd like to say the following about my curriculum committee service. The part of it that was the very best was not necessarily approving all the courses for the various components of the general education curriculum. That was very tedious work for both the submitters and for the committee. But important work because the committee had to make sure that the tenets that the general education curriculum was built upon, were met. But the best part about being on the curriculum committee was knowing what was going on in the curriculum. It was very exciting at that time. A number of majors were altered, new majors came into existence. But getting to work with the actual faculty members, there was a time when I was chair of the curriculum committee that I probably had a curriculum conversation with just about every faculty member that was on the staff at that point. And that was very, very rewarding. And I worked with many, many fine faculty colleagues while doing this work. And it was a lot of reading, a lot of talking, and a lot of discussion with the faculty.
Well said. Thank you. That's great. Well, as you look to turn over the computer science department to the next generation of scholars, what do you think some of their challenges will be?
There are many facets to computer science, and I'm going to say that this is just my personal opinion. Over I would say the second half of my tenure here, I've seen at least half of the students that I teach are really not best served in their career goals by the liberal arts, computer science curriculum. Their interests are outside of that sphere, and there are many job opportunities that are outside of the particular kinds of talents and skills you develop in such a curriculum. And we've attempted, as Ben pointed out, in doing the mobile apps and in doing the web-based stuff and in introducing the junior seminar and other such curricular innovations to address not only talking about a wider variety of topics, but also addressing topics that weren't necessarily the tissue of what a liberal arts computer science degree might be. And the consequence of that, at least in my particular case in the courses that I taught, were that some students, a good number of students, weren't exactly excited about the topics in some of the courses that I taught.
That's a challenge.
Yeah, I think
For both the instructor and for the student.
Yeah, I think a lot of students come. Our computer science program is a pretty theoretical program, I think. Although we try to have practical applications, but I think a lot of students come in thinking it'll be like what we call an information systems program that you might get at VCU, something like that, and it's not. So I mean, in time it may be that they hire somebody who could work with, say, maybe business econ and maybe develop a minor in that direction, so that it might be attractive to to other students. So.
we want the new faculty that we hire to be pretty versatile in terms of not only interdisciplinary collaboration, but also just because things change on the dime. I mean, now we got people talking about, gee, I want cybersecurity. Just about, I would say, 90% of students who come into computer science from high school want to go into game programming.
Right.
And how many students do you think actually do get to go into game programming? Not many. But some departments can use that as a handle. And if we have someone who wants to teach some principles by using game programming, then all the better. Or networking, or database, or web design, or whatever. There's got to be a lot of flexibility in the department to stay in tune with what people want and what people need. And I think we've started with our first two hires, started very well. Grant Sneecase and John McManus both show a lot of ability in being versatile and flexible and offering lots of things to the students and being very well tuned to what the students need. So that's good. Yeah.
Good.
I'm not a very good predictor. I predicted things in the past about computer science. My president at a former college asked me one time if mainframes or networking was going to be the big thing. And I said, well, I'm pretty sure it's going to be mainframe computers. So I'm hesitant to predict, but I think distance learning might have an effect on us down the line as a college in general. So I don't know, maybe that something the college will have to move a little bit towards, but I just don't really know.
No, and it does change so quickly and in ways we can't really anticipate. So yeah. Well, as you think about your years at Randolph-Macon, any other stories or memories you would like to share?
I remember the early years when I first came here. We used to play Friday nights was a big faculty kind of athletic night at the old gym. We'd bring our families, and there'd always be a volleyball game and basketball games, and we did that for several years while we could still run. But people like Russ Shea and Bruce Unger, who have since passed, and Jerry Garris, Mike Wessels, and John and John's son, and it was a lot of fun. Yeah. And
Sounds like a nice tradition.
Pardon?
That sounds like a nice tradition.
It was nice, yeah. And then I think a group of them would go over to the pizza place over here afterwards and have some more fun together, yeah. So, but I remember those days fondly, and
Because Ben was a good three-point shooter. He'd stand out there, swish, swish, swish.
You mean there was a 3-point shot back then?
Well, maybe there wasn't.
Well, I guess in some of those earlier years, too, most of the faculty lived in Ashland, and I think that had more of a sense of community than it might today with so many faculty living further afield. I've heard lots of memories about people on Mullen Drive and, just the Ashland community that I think as newer faculty come in, a lot of people don't necessarily live right in town.
Yeah, we wanted to live in Ashland in 1986, but there was nothing available. King's Charter and some of these developments that were starting weren't there yet, and then you could buy older houses, but then you still had to do a lot of work to them. So we actually ended up having to move to Mechanicsville, and then later on, I in 2000 I actually moved down towards Williamsburg. So I've been sort of I've had a long commute for half of my career here.
Right,
So.
right.
We started out on Mullen Drive. Well, actually, my first year at Randolph-Macon, we were on College Avenue in a big old house on the Hardee's end of College Avenue. We were renting it for $147 a month. Huge house. But because that was so expensive, we moved to Mullen Drive the second year at $105 a month. Yes. And we lived right next door to Lou Hames, who was in the classics department at the time. And Buster Ward was on the other side. Bruce Unger was down the way, and Roddy Jones was down the way. I don't remember who else. I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was kind of a campus community at the time.
Well, all is not lost. I live in Ashland,
Yes.
and I didn't come to 2001.
Yeah.
My next door neighbor for a number of years was Pedro Ruza, our football coach.
Yes.
Just down the block from me is our basketball coach, Nate Davis.
Yes.
And across the street, Chris Kilcoyne
Yep.
lived there, and he was our sports information director for quite a while.
Well, you were in the athletic subdivision then. That's where all the athletes live, it sounds like. Basketball, football, and
Well, I felt more like the sports reporter than the athlete.
you were in the right neighborhood.
But it's a great location. I mean,
Yeah.
you get to participate in all kinds of college activities.
I live right in Ashland. I love being close enough to, come back in the evening for something, or go to the Brock, or that kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
well, unless anyone wants the last word, any final thoughts on your time at Randolph-Macon, for the record? Ben?
Oh, well, I remember lots of great students, and lots of faculty members that are no longer here that I miss. And but yeah, I feel fortunate to have been able to teach here. Yeah, thanks in large part to the fellow sitting to my right here.
We've seen lots of good students and have lots of good friends out there as alumni now that we still hear from time to time, and it's always great to hear from them. And have had lots of good colleagues. It's been a good faculty to serve on. I mean, I've just enjoyed the job thoroughly. It's been great. I mean, there are times when it's pressure-packed or intense for one reason or another, but it's been a great place to work. I've loved it. And, these two guys have made things very nice.
Yeah, I think I have a closing thought, and that is, I've taught at a number of colleges, and I've never had a better set of colleagues than I've had here. And I want them to know that eventually I'm going to forgive them for making me serve as department chair. Not yet, but eventually.
Well, I want to thank all three of you for coming and sharing your memories today and with Making Memories. So thank you.
You're welcome.